You're kind, you're respectful, you listen when she talks, you're emotionally available, you have your life together, stable career, good friends, genuine intentions. You're exactly the kind of man women say they want. And yet, you watch the guy who treats women like disposable entertainment, who's clearly only interested in sex, who ghosts people without explanation, who manipulates and lies. You watch him get more romantic attention in a month than you've gotten in a year. And you're left wondering, what am I doing wrong? Here's the uncomfortable answer. Nothing. You're not doing anything wrong. The problem is you're playing by the rules of a game that doesn't actually exist. Because the dating market doesn't reward kindness and emotional availability in the early stages of attraction. It rewards something much darker, and today we're going to break down exactly what that is and why it works. Welcome to Primal Mind. I'm your host, and we're diving into one of the most frustrating paradoxes in modern dating: why men with dark triad personality traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy consistently outperform good men in initial attraction and short-term mating contexts. This isn't moral philosophy. This isn't me telling you to become a narcissist. This is clinical psychology and evolutionary biology, explaining a pattern that research has documented across dozens of studies. And more importantly, we're going to extract the psychological mechanisms these men use and show you how to compete ethically without becoming someone you're not. If you've ever felt invisible while watching terrible men succeed romantically, this episode will explain everything. Let's start with the science. The dark triad is a personality construct identified by psychologists Delroy Paulhus and Kevin Williams in 2002. It consists of 3 overlapping but distinct traits: narcissism, grandiose self-perception; entitlement, need for admiration, lack of empathy; Machiavellianism, strategic manipulation, emotional detachment, willingness to deceive for personal gain; psychopathy, impulsivity, thrill-seeking, lack of remorse, superficial charm. On paper, these sound like terrible traits for relationships. And they are, for long-term relationships. But here's what the research consistently shows. Men high in dark triad traits have more sexual partners, more short-term relationships, and more initial dating success than men low in these traits. A landmark study by Peter Jonassen and his colleagues, published in Personality and Individual Differences, found that dark triad men pursue what they call a fast life strategy. They prioritize short-term mating over long-term pair bonding. They're more willing to deceive, they're more sexually unrestricted, they have more partners and shorter relationship durations, and crucially, women find them more attractive in initial encounters. Not because women consciously prefer bad men, but because the behavioral strategies dark triad men use trigger ancient attraction mechanisms that evolved long before modern dating existed. So what are those mechanisms? What psychological tricks do these men use that good men don't? Let's break down the 4 core strategies. Strategy number 1. Strategic confidence and outcome independence. Dark triad men display extreme confidence bordering on arrogance. They believe they're exceptional. They act entitled to attention and success. And here's the key: they're genuinely not worried about rejection. Narcissism makes them believe they're too valuable to be rejected. Psychopathy makes them emotionally unaffected by rejection. Machiavellianism makes them view rejection as a numbers game rather than personal failure. The result? They approach women without hesitation, without self-doubt, without the anxiety that plagues most men. And women's attraction systems are highly calibrated to detect confidence, not for shallow reasons, but because for most of human evolutionary history, confidence was an honest signal of competence and status. If you're confident, you probably have reason to be. Your ancestors who were confident were probably successful hunters, high-status tribe members, effective leaders. So female psychology evolved to find confidence attractive because it was a reliable indicator of genetic quality and resource provision. The problem is, dark triad confidence is fake. It's not based on actual competence. It's based on delusion and lack of self-awareness. But the attraction mechanism can't tell the difference. It just detects the signal and responds. Meanwhile, you, the good man, are racked with self-doubt. You worry about being creepy. You second-guess whether she's interested. You hesitate before approaching. You apologize for taking up her time. All of that signals low confidence, and low confidence, regardless of your actual value, triggers the same evolutionary response as low competence. So she's not attracted, not because you're low value, but because you're signaling low value through your behavior. Strategy number 2. Emotional unavailability and scarcity. Dark triad men are emotionally unavailable, not as a tactic, but as a genuine incapacity. Narcissists are so self-focused, they can't emotionally attune to others, Psychopaths lack the neurological substrate for deep emotional bonding. Machiavellians view emotional availability as weakness to be exploited. So they're distant, aloof, hard to read. They don't text back immediately. They don't make themselves available. They don't prioritize any single woman. And counterintuitively, this creates intense attraction in the early stages. Why? Because scarcity increases perceived value. It's basic economics applied to human attention. If something is easily available, it's assumed to be low value. If something is scarce and hard to obtain, it's assumed to be high value. Dark Triad men are scarce. They don't chase, they don't demonstrate excessive interest. They keep women guessing. This triggers what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. Sometimes they're attentive, sometimes they're distant. The unpredictability creates an anxiety dopamine loop that feels like intense attraction. Meanwhile, you, the good man, are consistent, available, and responsive. You text back promptly. You make time for her. You show genuine interest. All things that should be attractive, right? Wrong. In the early stages, before attachment has formed, consistency signals low value. It suggests you don't have options. It suggests you're desperate. It suggests you're only focused because you couldn't attract anyone else. So paradoxically, your availability makes you less attractive, while his unavailability makes him more attractive. Strategy number 3. Dominance displays and boundary violation. Dark Triad men are socially dominant. They interrupt, they take up physical space, they speak loudly and confidently, they make bold claims, they don't defer to social norms. Narcissists believe they deserve special treatment. Psychopaths don't fear social consequences. Machiavellians strategically use dominance to establish hierarchy. And dominance is one of the most powerful attraction triggers in human mating psychology. Again, this isn't shallow. Dominance was a survival-relevant trait for most of human history. Dominant men controlled resources, protected their families, and passed on high-status genes. But here's the dark part. Dark Triad men also violate boundaries as a dominance signal. They touch women without explicit permission. They make sexually forward comments early. They ignore soft rejections and keep pushing. They create what researchers call tension and release cycles. They push boundaries, which creates anxiety, then back off slightly, which creates relief. That relief feels like attraction. And some women respond to this because their attraction systems are calibrated to reward dominance displays, even when those displays are actually violations. Meanwhile, you, the good man, are respectful. You ask for permission. You respect boundaries. You wait for clear interest signals before escalating. All morally correct behaviors. But they signal low dominance. They signal you're not confident enough to lead. They signal you're asking for permission rather than creating experiences. So she feels comfortable but not attracted. She respects you but doesn't desire you. Strategy number 4. Storytelling and grandiose narratives. Dark Triad men are exceptional storytellers. Narcissists genuinely believe they're the hero of every story. Machiavellians strategically craft narratives that make them appear high value. Psychopaths lie effortlessly without the physiological tells that honest people display. So they tell exciting stories. Stories where they're always the protagonist, always overcoming obstacles, always winning. They exaggerate achievements. They fabricate adventures. They present themselves as more interesting than they actually are. And stories are neurologically powerful. When you hear a good story, your brain releases oxytocin and dopamine. You simulate the experiences being described. You feel emotionally connected to the storyteller. So Dark Triad men create emotional experiences through narrative manipulation. They make women feel things: excitement, intrigue, desire. It doesn't matter if the stories are true. The emotional impact is real. Meanwhile, you, the good man, are honest. You downplay your achievements out of modesty. You tell truthful but boring stories about your actual life. You don't exaggerate. You don't fabricate. All admirable traits. But they make you forgettable. She walks away from the Dark Triad man feeling like she met someone extraordinary. She walks away from you feeling like she met someone nice. Nice doesn't create arousal. Extraordinary does. So let's synthesize. Dark Triad men win an initial attraction because they display strategic confidence, emotional unavailability, social dominance, and grandiose narratives. All of these behaviors trigger ancient attraction mechanisms that evolved to identify high-status, genetically fit mates. The fact that these men are actually terrible long-term partners is irrelevant in the attraction phase because female psychology is trying to assess genetic quality, not relationship potential, in that initial window. Now, here's the crucial part. You're probably expecting me to say, so become a narcissist. I'm not saying that. Dark triad traits predict relationship failure, domestic violence, infidelity, emotional abuse, and eventual abandonment. Women who end up in long-term relationships with these men suffer immensely. The initial attraction comes at enormous cost, so the solution is not to become a bad person. The solution is to understand the mechanisms and deploy ethical versions of them. Let me break down the ethical counter-strategies. For strategic confidence and outcome independence, the counter-strategy is genuine self-worth and abundance mentality. Dark triad men fake confidence through delusion. You need real confidence through competence. That means becoming genuinely good at things that matter. Building a life you're proud of. Developing skills, friendships, purpose, and identity that exist independent of romantic success. When you have a full life, rejection stops being devastating. Not because you're emotionally numb, but because one woman's disinterest doesn't threaten your entire sense of worth. And abundance mentality doesn't mean being a player. It means recognizing that there are millions of potential compatible partners. So any single interaction is low stakes. You can be bold and direct because failure in one conversation doesn't matter. That mindset creates the same behavioral output as dark triad outcome independence, but without the pathology. For emotional unavailability and scarcity, the counter strategy is strategic pacing and priority management. You don't become emotionally unavailable, but you do become strategically unavailable. That means not being immediately accessible in the early stages. Not because you're playing games, but because you actually have a life that matters more than any single romantic prospect. You have work you're committed to. You have hobbies you prioritize. You have friends you see regularly. So when she texts, you respond, but not immediately. Not because you're timing it for manipulation, but because you are actually doing something important, and you don't make her your only priority until she's earned that status through reciprocal investment. Early dating should be low investment, high enjoyment. Coffee, not expensive dinners. Activities you do anyway, not elaborate dates. This creates the same scarcity signal as dark triad, unavailability but without the emotional cruelty. For dominance displays and boundary violation, the counter strategy is leadership and decisive action. You don't violate boundaries, but you do lead. You make plans without asking for permission. You say, we're doing this, not would you maybe want to possibly do this if that's okay? You're physically confident. You take up space. You speak clearly and directly. You disagree when you disagree rather than deferring to keep peace. You touch appropriately and confidently, shoulder touch, hand on lower back while guiding through a door, without asking verbally, because the context makes it appropriate. The difference between this and dark triad boundary violation is calibration and respect. You're dominant but not domineering. You lead but you notice her response. If she's uncomfortable, you adjust. If she's engaged, you escalate. You're paying attention to her, not just imposing your will. That creates the attraction benefit of dominance without the moral violation. For storytelling and grandiose narratives, the counter strategy is compelling honesty. You don't fabricate but you do craft. You tell true stories but you tell them well. You emphasize the emotional arc. You describe the stakes, the conflict, the resolution. You make your actual life sound as interesting as it actually is. And you curate. You don't lead with mundane details. You lead with the stories that reveal your character, your adventures, your growth. You're not lying, you're framing. You're presenting the most compelling version of your honest self. And you build a life worth storytelling about. You have adventures. You take risks. You do interesting things, so you don't need to fabricate. Your actual life becomes the source material for compelling narrative. Let's be clear about what we're doing here. We're not becoming dark triad. We're extracting the psychological mechanisms they accidentally deploy and consciously applying ethical versions. We're competing on the same dimensions: confidence, scarcity, dominance, narrative, but through healthy expression rather than pathology. And here's the key: this actually works better long term. Because when the initial attraction transitions to relationship evaluation, you're not revealed as a fraud. You're revealed as exactly what you presented: a confident, interesting, decisive man who respects her but doesn't supplicate to her. The dark triad man gets initial attraction but inevitably reveals himself as hollow, cruel, or unstable. You get initial attraction and then deepen it through genuine substance. That's the sustainable path. So here's your homework. First, audit your confidence. Are you hesitating because you're being thoughtful or because you're afraid? If it's fear, address the root. Build competence in areas that matter. Second, audit your availability. Are you responsive because you're considerate or because you're desperate? If it's desperation, build a fuller life so romantic prospects become additions, not solutions. Third, audit your leadership. Are you asking permission constantly? Start making decisions. Start leading interactions. Notice if people follow. If they do, you're calibrated correctly. Fourth, audit your storytelling. Are you boring people with accurate but uncompelling narratives? Practice telling your life stories with emotional arc and stakes. Make truth compelling. Do this for 90 days and track results. I guarantee you'll see different responses. Not because you became a bad person, but because you learned to present your goodness in a language that attraction systems understand. The dark triad men win because they accidentally speak that language. You can learn to speak it deliberately without sacrificing your integrity. Thanks for listening to Primal Mind. If this helped you understand the game you're actually playing, subscribe and share it with one friend who's confused why being a good man isn't enough. Until next time, stay strategic, stay ethical, and remember, you can be good and attractive. You just have to learn how to make good compete.